You're listening to 91.7 WLFR Pomona at the Richard Stockton College. This is Mark, and you're listening to another Eclectic Journey. We're going to do something a little different today. We have a former Stockton student. His name is David Natus. He's going to talk about his books that he has written. They're very interesting, and I think you'll enjoy this. Welcome to the program, David.
Thanks, Mark. It's great to be here.
I'm glad you're here. Let's go back. What piqued your interest in writing?
I said, you know what? I'm going to write something that I can end it the way I want it to end. That's how it really began. So I started writing a novel, a science fiction novel, Silver Sides, that I'm still working on. Then during that process, I started a small novella called November Seed, is to understand the whole self-publishing aspect, and the book started to take off. It was a small novella. It's an easy read. It's available on Amazon.com, ebook format only. That really just got me started.
You mentioned the self-publishing phenomenon. It's unbelievable. Anybody now can write a book and somehow, some way, they can get it published. I mean, it doesn't have to be through a big publishing company. You can do it yourself. Pretty amazing the way that's taken off. So let's talk about November Seed.
When we walked in here today at the Student Center, this building was not even here when I started. Meredith and I walk in, we're in the lobby, and there, above where the fireplace is a really large painting of Phragmites. I would say the antagonist of the story, November Seed. It takes place by two marine biologists, ex-Stockton students, and it's loosely written after myself and a good friend of mine, Dan, who's a major protagonist in the book. It starts off with what I knew here at Stockton as a marine science major. I've spent hours in the field, a lot of Phragmites fields, so this small story just started to flow out of me. I started to really like the characters, and then I wanted to keep it short, keep it novella format, so it's a quick read. That really gave me a good inlay into the whole self-publishing aspect, and like I said, I was really surprised at how well it started to take off. The reviews started coming in, and what was nice was the reviews were very consistent. They all said the same thing: great characters, couldn't put the book down, and a great ending. And now I'm getting a lot of pressure, actually, to continue the saga, so we'll see how that goes.
I guess self-publishing for you has been all positive.
It really is. My background is marine biology, and then after some years of working in the industry, I switched over to computer science. I thought computer science was going to be a really big thing in the industry, and I was afraid to go back to school for 2 years, because I thought by the time I got out, there would be no more computer jobs. So I went back for 6 months, took some programming. Now, 20-something years later, with all this experience, I've still found the whole self-publishing aspect difficult to start. It's so undocumented, and I think that's it. Very rewarding. There's no pressure on you. You're not really outlaying any money unless you really want to start to get into some editing, if you're not having friends do it. The first part of it, which is just understanding how to get it into the format for Amazon. Amazon uses something called .mobi, and the first steps were kind of monumental for me, even as a technologist. Now that I've gone through it, it is incredibly easy, and I'd encourage anyone to start.
I hear you. I think everybody would like to write. They might not admit it. I think everybody would like to write the great novel, or the great screenplay, or I think I'm no different.
Everyone has a story to tell, and that's what you find out. A great place to get started is Google+, and there are so many writing communities for particular genres that you're interested in. Can't tell you how invaluable that was to me, how many great contacts and feedback I got from that community, that without it, I don't know if I would have been able to self-publish.
What motivates you to write? What's the pure impetus behind it?
I would say I get to read what I really want to read. So if I write it, I get to read exactly how I would like to read a book and how I want it to end. That's become fascinating. I can't tell you how many times I've read November Seed going through the editing process, and yet every time I read it, I feel like I'm reading someone else's book and I'm critiquing it. At the end of it, I'm excited that it's actually mine, and I got to end it the way I wanted to.
November Seed, now, are you going to continue it? Is there going to be like a volume 2, or is there something going to be spun off from November Seed?
That has been echoed by, I think, everyone who has reviewed it, so yes. It took me a while to think about an ending because I wasn't writing the original novella for a sequel. So I put them into a corner that I thought was impossible to get out of. I actually came up with a very good twist to get them out of it and continue the saga, so I'm sure I will. I just want to finish up Silver Sides, which is, I'm already through the drafts, and I'm going through a second draft. Once I finish that, I will come right back to November Seed and continue it.
Okay, so let's talk about Silver Sides.
a very epic novel. I took a lot of what I learned here at Stockton, which has been invaluable to me about the marine biology and studying it, and I really wanted to bring that aspect out in a science fiction. There's so many different genres of science fiction. There's hard science fiction, soft science fiction, and I was answering some post on G Plus the other day saying, what's your favorite genre? I made one up. I just called it in vitro science fiction, which is taking taking what you know and putting it into an environment of worlds that myself as the author will make up. And I really wanted to bring that out. I realized all of our science fictions, every alien comes here to this planet and wants to kick our ass. Why do we always look at these aliens, except for maybe E.T. and a couple of other things, but they're pretty hideous. And then I began to wonder, is that really just a reflection of ourselves? Is that what we would do if we were the intelligent species out there? And that's where this story begins. There are 6 advanced humans that are going to a planet of inhabitants called Sekbi, and they're completely unaware that Earth or humans exist, and we're really coming to invade them. So it's a twist on a science fiction that we're very familiar with, but there's a lot of biology along the way, and the characters are great, and I've fallen in love with them myself. I'm protecting them, and that's the hardest thing, I think, to do as an author, is you don't want to kill anybody off, but you have to sometimes.
Sure, and there's always that possibility, being fiction, that you might, in the back of your mind, bring them back at some point.
Yes, and so you try not to write them into a corner.
You mentioned ETs. I've always been fascinated by the study of UFOs, ufology, extraterrestrial life, paranormal. I think it's fascinating when you can take that aspect and bring it in such a way where people will look at even a piece of fiction, say, hey, wait a minute, there are all these possibilities out there. I see all that as a positive. I was not a Trekkie as a kid. I love different forms of science fiction. I'm going to guess that you did too.
It was such an important part of my life. And there's so much science fiction today. If you look at all the top movies that are coming out, there's some aspect of it.
To me, the possibilities are endless. And you bring out, in your writing, the apocalyptic version, for lack of a better term, of how life is. And I find that also fascinating. People keep coming back to that. You want to talk about that aspect?
I started with something that I really knew and loved. Everybody who reads this book now knows what the word Phragmites is. It's those tall reeds that you see all over South Jersey out in the fields where nothing else will grow. It's usually in a salt marsh. And they have those really heavy plumes on the top. And every November, those seeds all release the same day. And it's usually the first 2 weeks of November. And you could easily mistake it for the first flurries of the season. And that was really the catalyst for me to start this. So it was hard because I was like, okay, where do I go from here, right? How do you make Phragmites interesting? So I started to bring in some characters who I knew, a good friend of mine and myself. We went on this journey and started in South Jersey and ended up in the Adirondacks. I didn't want it to be the typical, Z-word as I've interviewed this, he hated zombie genres. And he said, oh my God, once I saw the Z-word in this book, I was going to put it down. But he said, I was so fascinated by how you twist the entire storyline of that. It's not really a zombie story as much as it is friendships.
Speaking of zombies, why you mention it? Well, it's in my head now. What do you think? You think there's just too much zombieism in the world right now? I mean, it's every other day. There's either a TV show about zombies, there's a movie about zombies. It's kind of like what vampires were 10 years ago.
Exactly. Yeah. I think there is a little bit overindulgence into the zombie genres right now, at least in a lot of the series on TV, Sci-Fi Channel, and things like that. I don't know what made me start to even bring that into it, but like I said, I put a very different twist to it. I use the same delivery mechanism. There's a particular fungus that lives in these ants in the Amazon, and the ants ingest it, and then this twig-like growth pops out of their skull and drives them to go back into an ant colony and latch onto a leaf. Once it's there and it's locked, then the fungus continues to grow, feeding off of the ant and spreading to others. And I found that so hideous as a real-life biology.
Yeah, you mentioned seeds a little while ago, and the first thing that popped into my mind was Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Yes.
I mean, that's scary to think that it would happen that way as far as people finally coming into contact with ETs. So, all right. So let's go back when you were really young, as far as influences, as far as writers, as far as sci-fi writers, television programs. What kicked it off for you? What was the spark?
Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, which not a lot of people remember. I grew up in the Jersey Shore, and I spent most of my life underwater and surfing, so water was a big part of my life. And it was fairly accurate when I look back at it, and that really got me interested.
You know what? That show is classic. I have to say that Irwin Allen did a good job there. I tip my hat off to him for that one. Good actors too. I mean, the show was really well written.
Yeah. In fact, I just saw that submarine. I'm trying to remember what the name of the submarine.
You know what? I can't think of it either. What'd you think about Twilight Zone, in particular, Rod Serling?
In love with his voice. On the borderline of an intellectual creepy, I guess. That show, I think, was great. It was small vignettes, and you couldn't get enough of them. Those were, that probably steered me a lot toward that, too.
Looking back, I think I was more scared of great programming like Twilight Zone, rather than the interface, splashy gore thrown out to people today, and it's passed off as sci-fi or horror or fantasy. And to me, it was the mystery. What was behind the cloak? You didn't know. So guys like Rod Serling made them master storytellers.
It was so much of the unknown, all of a sudden being completely normal and then maybe being infected mentally or physically through some agent. And I think that's what freaks out a lot of people in a good sci-fi is you don't want anything on you that will change you. And I think that's what the Twilight Zone, and that's why when I wrote November Seed, it's just a seed that gets on you and you can't really see it.
Another show that comes to my mind from that period is Outer Limits. I rank that up there, the very best.
I don't think I ever missed an episode of either The Outer Limits or The Twilight Zone. Going back a little bit, the name of that submarine was the Seaview, which is kind of ironic because Stockton's affiliation with the Seaview. Right?
There you go.
There we go.
That's right. Circle. It was the Seaview. Very good. I didn't remember that. You get an A+. Yeah, Outer Limits, it was only on for like 2 years. It leaves this indelible impression, even today. That beginning, when they tell you...
don't touch the television dial.
Yep.
Right. Just that part alone, right? And the static on the television.
Yeah, you know what? And there's kids who are 20 today. I don't think they know. I don't think they realize what we had growing up.
Remember The Invaders with David Vincent?
I remember that show, too.
That was great.
I agree. So let's talk about a couple of authors. Ray Bradbury.
To paraphrase, science fiction is the art of what's plausible, and fantasy is the art of what isn't possible.
He was so ahead of the curve. These tablets that we have, if you read his books, he foretold that, 70 years ago or 80 years ago. I mean, he was right.
Right. And the funny thing is, he only considered having ever written one science fiction, and that was Fahrenheit 451. And he considered his others really not science fiction genre.
Yeah, I remember Fahrenheit 451. I even remember the movie also. I mean...
Oh, it was a great book and a great movie.
Yep, I agree. The movie is terrific. H.G. Wells. Everything that I've read, books that have been made into the movies, I mean, they also leave an indelible impression.
War of the Worlds was probably the first alien that was just relentless. It didn't have feeling or compassion. It had one mission: wipe us out.
Yeah.
And when I saw the movie as a kid, that scared me to a fascinating kind of a...
Well, you're familiar with the radio recording.
Yes.
Orson Welles.
Yes.
And his players. When I hear that recording, it is chilling.
The original is fantastic.
And I remember my mom telling me this when she was a little girl and when my father was like 10 and when he had first heard it on the radio. You'd thought it was actually happening. I mean, they panicked. And that part of it was all true. I mean...
And the fact that it took place not far from here.
Yeah, that's another amazing point. The Invisible Man.
Yes.
Time Machine. I don't know if you listen to Coast to Coast, familiar with Art Bell.
No, but now you're intriguing me.
Art Bell is no longer involved in the program. He's one of the guys that brought UFOs really into the mainstream back in the late 80s, early 90s. And he had this incredible show. Everything that you couldn't find on regular talk radio. UFOs, the paranormal, conspiracies. I mean, you name it. Some of his old programs, they're rerun every Saturday night. Could probably find an affiliate station that broadcasts that show. I would definitely check that out. You would enjoy that.
Yeah, sounds great.
I think where we're going is, I'm trying to think of the word for it. If you noticed, I'd say over the past 25 years, all the things that we've been talking about, do you notice it gets more and more mainstream?
Right.
So I believe we're not alone. There are universes bigger, infinitely bigger than our own. And I think we've been visited for thousands of years. I mean, I think it's just, you can't deny it.
When you look back at some of the drawings 1,000 years ago, they all seem to depict the recent prequel to Alien, Mayan caves.
Prometheus. Fascinating movie.
I personally loved it. I thought it was great. Yeah. So if you understand the Greek mythology behind it, then the movie makes full sense. Yes, I mean, the amount of planets that they're discovering almost on a daily basis from Kepler, you're starting to get bored of it now because there are so many Earth-like planets discovered. Earth-like planet discovered yesterday, Earth-like planet discovered last week. And granted, some of them are 50 to 500 light years away, which the technology we have, we're not going to get there anytime soon. And that was really one of the catalysts for me writing Silversides. I wrote about Gliese 581G, which was discovered in 2012, quickly surpassed by the amount of planets. And that's only 20 light years away. So all of a sudden we get to something that is doable. If you travel 1/2 the speed of light, you're going to get there in 500 years. If you can travel 3/4, you're going to get there in the 100 to 200 years. So it becomes plausible, and that's what I focused on for Silversides.
2001, Space Odyssey.
I was an usher during that time, and then I proceeded to see it somewhere between 17 and 20 times. That was so influential to me. And in fact, I just watched the original 3 months ago, and I was stunned at how accurate it was and how well the set design was because there was no CGI back then. Mm-hmm. It was phenomenally done, and that was a real intellectual sci-fi.
There are things in that movie, certain parts, certain points, if you watch it carefully, we're being told, watch out for this, and now it's 40 years later, and it's happening.
I don't know if you saw the recent image from Curiosity on Mars. It stumbled across some rock. It looked like a thigh bone. Of course, that immediately set off every UFO activist out there, and it went viral. NASA professionals are saying it's just an ill-formed rock, but it was so spooky that it actually looked like a thigh bone.
No, I think it's more than just a rock. I think that's a lot of smoke. And there's the three NASAs: the NASA that the public knows, and then there's the NASA that's. They know there's a lot of things that they know that we're not supposed to know, but they're throwing them out there every so often, to say they throw these little bones out, well, for lack of a better term, and then we're like, hey, wait a minute. Whoa.
And it might be that they have to because you've got someone like Elon Musk, and he's our modern-day Edison. He's going to put us on Mars, along with the Mars One community out of the Netherlands. 2025 is when they're hoping to send 4 astronauts on a one-way mission.
It seems like everybody wants to build some kind of an apparatus and take it to Mars. Richard Branson.
Right. Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, Jeff Bezos. Yeah, I don't know. All these guys with mega money, they're coming out of the woodwork. They're saying, you know what? I want to go past the moon. I don't want to just go to the moon. I want to go to Mars. I want to go to wherever.
As kids, rocketry seemed science fiction. Now that I feel like I'm finally living the science fiction that we used to read about.
I feel the same way. In one sense, it's scary. In another sense, I look at it in wonderment. It's possible. It's not just for TV. While we're on space and fiction and movies and television, what do you think of the Star Wars phenomenon?
I love the first one. I watched the second, and then I sort of dropped off on that. I have been following the latest sequels to it. It's enough to make me want to go back and now catch up on all of them, because actually what they're working on now, I've seen some of the set props, and it's hard to tell what is design or what is reality. I think I'm going to be forced to go back and have some kind of a marathon of Star Wars night.
Like you, I love the first movie. The second and third of that trio of pictures just didn't do anything for me.
It falls in sort of the space opera. Not my favorite.
Yeah, it's not. I don't.
You're going to hate me for that, but it's just not.
Don't get me wrong. George Lucas, fantastic. I mean, his films are shot beautifully from a technical standpoint. Yeah, they're like space operas. You know what? They should give crash courses on old science fiction movies to the kids today.
If you're a science fiction buff, I would highly recommend that you get over to Singularity in Brooklyn. It's in the Dumbo section down under the Manhattan Bridge. Just take the F train from Manhattan. It's a fascinating walk back into time. I've never seen anybody come out of there without a stack of books because they bind them in that old twine. So people come in and then they buy like 4 or 5 of these science fiction paperbacks.
I have to go there. Thank you for telling the audience about that. I did not know that. I have to get to Brooklyn more. Getting back to your writing, if I met you for the first time, which I actually am meeting you for the first time today, and I was interested in getting my book self-published, what would be the steps to go about?
The first thing is, don't worry so much about your book. You can write it in Word. I used my Samsung tablet, and I use documents to go. So you don't need a really great formatter. But I would highly recommend that you get Scrivener, a writer's application, whether it's a novel, whether it's a screenplay, whether it's a short story, whether it's an ebook. You can follow these templates, and there's a great tutorial. I spent 2 hours on it myself. Once you have your story, you can pop in your cover art. My cover art for November Seed was taken on an Android phone, so you don't need anything fancy. I put zero money into this except for the Scrivener, which was $45, because it can cut a version for Amazon, which they use a .mobi format. Barnes & Noble use their Nook. They have a format, and then there's iTunes format, Sony's format. You can produce any format, and that's the beauty of it. And that's about the hardest part. So once you have that, I ended up choosing Amazon for a couple of reasons. If you ask anybody, where do you get a book online? 9 out of 10 people will say Amazon. That's a good place to start. And I wanted to produce it only in ebook format, which is their Kindle format. It can be read on any device. Whether you have an iPhone, Android, tablet, PC, or laptop Kindle, you can download the Kindle app. That app is free. Go to iTunes, Google Play, you can go to Amazon, find November Seed. You're not going to break your wallet at $1.49. You'll see the format, and it looks so professional. Nothing that I did. It's just following the cookbook instructions of Scrivener. Problem is, it's so undocumented. Now, there's books on how to self-publish, and I've read a few of them. You can open any Word doc, pull it into Scrivener, and then cut it into .mobi format, and follow the instructions on Amazon. It's called Kindle Direct Publishing, KDP. Just upload your document. It's asking you questions all along the way. What's the title? What's your name? Don't worry about all the ISBN numbers that or copyrights. And that was a huge learning curve for me, because I thought, okay, everyone has to have a copyright.
Right.
And I asked a lot of people on my writing communities, do I need a copyright? Half of them said no, half of them said yes. And then I went to the government website. Really, one of the first things that it stated, I almost fell over in my chair, is you don't really need a copyright. The minute you write something, you are protecting your intellectual property. You just need to put the letter C, the little insignia that you always see next to it, and that protects you. The second thing is these ISBN numbers, and those, I found out, are only used for hardcover books, because Amazon creates their own indexing, and that's just really a universal indexing number, so that if it's in a bookstore and somebody wants to reorder it, they can go up and look at the ISBN number and find out its stock and things like that. So you don't really need that for self-publishing. I produced November Seed, and the only expense I put into it was Scrivener. Trust me, coming from a technologist, you want to take that route, because there are some free applets out there that convert your Word doc into Mobi format, but they're not for the faint-hearted. So even I, as a technologist, skipped that step and just got the Scrivener app, and that's been a godsend for me. Once you get it up there, it's fantastic. Amazon gives you some great tools to be able to track sales and to provide feedback. And I didn't realize until I actually wrote something how important it is to go back and give feedback and reviews, because authors like myself are looking for that. It was nice to see that there was a consistency in the feedback, that everyone was saying the same thing. Great character development, great pace, couldn't put it down, killer ending. Okay, that's what I set out to do, and I'm seeing that echoed. It was so important. So yeah, if you do, take the time. I hope you do. It's a great read. Please give me a review and let me know how you feel about it. The second aspect, try not to go on too long about this, but it's the social aspect. I had a Facebook account. I have a G+ account. I had Instagram. I had Twitter, Goodreads. I had Wattpad, but none of them were connected to each other. That was the hardest part. I all of a sudden realized once everything starts pointing to everything else, it gets exponential. When I first wrote November Seed and I went to Google and I typed in November Seed, I think I was on page 20. I saw everything about seeds, planting seeds, the month of November, things that happened in November, when's a good time to plant seeds in November. Then that's when I sat back as a technologist and said, okay, what's going on here with search engine optimization? And I began to look at what I do for a living and actually apply. I mean, that's always the case, right? Dr. Heal Thyself.
Sure.
So I sat back and really looked at what I was doing. And now if you go to Google and you type in November Seed, I'm 1, 2, and 3. I'll be happy to, answer anybody's questions. Go to my website, davidnadas.com, and post your question. You can do that on Wattpad as well. And I'll be happy to answer any questions. It's a lot easier than you think. It's just that it's so undocumented.
Let's talk about what you listen to when you write.
That turned out to be fascinating because I thought it was just me. When I was sitting down writing Silversides, I would get into like a lull. And so then I'd put on some great space music and then that charged me up. And I posted that question on G+ to my writers group. Does anybody else listen to music out there? And I found out most of the writers out there have their personal tracks. With November Seed, there was a song called How This Ends by Dvorak. When you start to read it, this story begins to unwind. So how does this end? And I would put that on, and it would charge me up. It worked really well to have a good soundtrack. Silversides, I have about 37 songs in there, and the first song that got me started was by Silver Sun Pickups called Lazy Eye. Not very science fiction, but it's a great bar scene. There's a video that goes with it, and it looks like it takes place in either Australia or New Zealand. I just thought it was a great bar scene, great song, and it made me feel good. Silverside starts off in a bar scene from that song, and then I have a track of about 37 other songs. 9 Inch Nails, I don't know if you've ever listened to some of their just pure instrumental. It's almost static.
Yep.
Yeah. And so
noise.
Yeah. So it's as my ship is moving through, and coincidentally the ship is in the shape of the obelisk of 2001. I needed some sort of static background because I'm going through interstellar space for 56 Earth years. You begin to build up these tracks, and I don't know if I could have written any of these books without having a really good music soundtrack.
You know what? That's fascinating because everybody writes differently, so to speak. It's fascinating to me because, like I said, everybody's different in how they write or when they sit down and write it and what they listen to, or if they don't listen to anything. But looking at what you just said, I'm seeing this as a movie, potentially. How about you?
A November Seed?
Yeah.
A lot of the readers have said, so when does the movie come out? I don't know. Obviously, I need a lot more subscribers, so if you're out there and you want to give me a review, that's what'll make it into a movie, so someone can see that and pick it up. Same with Wattpad. But when you're writing, you're seeing it as a movie. I wanted to focus on some great character development, and I think it would be a very, very good movie.
I think so too, but the way you're just described it, I could see it as a movie.
It's got a little bit of everything for the reader. It's science, aliens, zombies, sex, albeit one shade of gray.
You know what? I was thinking about that bar scene, what you could do with it as a movie.
The opening scene, it was my favorite. In fact, when I started it, it had nothing to do with the book. And then I repeat the same scene on another planet, Gliese 581G, 20 light years away, over 150 years later. And I hope the readers pick that up. I love music. That's why I listen to your show. I now have a calendar reminder every Wednesday at 2:58.
Thank you.
And,
wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, music is such an important part. And I quote a lot of music. I slip it into my stories.
Kind of drives me to do the things that I'm into. I know where you're coming from. Let's talk a little bit about your days at Stockton and compare them to the Stockton now, if you don't mind.
Okay, I graduated in 1980, a marine science major. I was lost today coming on campus. It was so impressive. I mean, I loved the architecture when I started here back in the mid-70s. It was very modern, and it's held up well. I mean, I'm looking around. That was the first time I've ever seen a floor-to-ceiling whiteboard. I mean, I didn't even know what it was when I started. It didn't exist outside of this school. In fact, I went into corporate America in New York in technology, and that wasn't introduced until the late 80s. So Stockton is way ahead of itself and very forward-thinking. It was a very green school even back then. And what they've done today is phenomenal. When I started here, there was no student government. You couldn't even eat anywhere on campus. You had to go off campus to eat. The dorms were full efficiency apartments. I mean, they wanted, I think, to teach students how to live in the real world after you graduate. So you had to go out and get your own groceries. A lot of us lived off campus. I lived in Brigantine. I lived in Long Beach Island. Gas was 57 cents or something like that a gallon. So it wasn't so bad.
Remember, yeah.
But it was a small school, very intimate, because when it rained, you never needed to leave the building. You just traveled within it most of the time on a skateboard. I would go to class, and in between classes, I would run out with Dan. That's how I met him. There's a scene in November Seed where these two guys meet for the first time in the north end of Atlantic City, and that was actually a real scene. I was in between class, put on my wetsuit that was in my car, rode to the north end of Atlantic City because I knew the waves were going to be great. I'm pulling on my wetsuit as a guy near me on the next stoop is pulling on his wetsuit, so of course we want to be the first in the water. And then all of a sudden a squad of cop cars come flying down the street toward us. So we look at each other like, okay, we're each thinking that each other is the reason why the cop cars are coming down here. And the cops jump out of their car, they got their guns drawn, and they run up between us into an apartment building. We just walked to the beach like this happened every day. We didn't want to look like we weren't cool in front of the other guy. And then we became best of friends from that point. But that's a real scene that in November Seed. Atlantic City didn't even have casinos. I mean, they were just starting up. The school itself was brand new. I was the 10th class to graduate. First class indoors, very intimate. And the joke back then used to be, you could be an escaped convict and come in, just sit down and chill out, and no one would pay any attention to it, and you'd just fit in. And not that we were escaped convicts or anything like that, but I mean, it was just that atmosphere. It was so modern, it was so different from anything I had ever seen, and invaluable to me. So much of what I learned here went into November Seed and Silver Seed.
Wow, that's awesome. Where do you see yourself going as far as writing? Do you have like 3 more novels in your head?
I knew I wanted to write years and years and years ago, but it's like looking at a beautiful painting and saying, wow, that's a really beautiful painting. And then you go to try to paint it and you realize, oh my God, I'm terrible. This is like a stick figure compared to what I see there. The same thing happened to me with writing. For years, I just took notes. I had an idea in my head, and then I would see an article, take the hyperlink, or write it down in a document. I just kept keeping notes. Right now, I have about 4 or 5 really good stories to tell. November Seed was really the start. Silver Sides is written for 2 volume, but I think in between those 2 volumes, I'll come right back to November Seed because I'm getting, like I said, too much pressure to not continue it. And then I have a couple other really great stories. There's one called Glycerin, which by Bush, the song Glycerin, that inspired me to write like a real android love story. There have been android love stories before, but this is as different to an android love story as November Seed is to zombies. That's the one I really wanted to write, but I didn't want to blow it. That was going to be my masterpiece. I'm gearing up for that, and I think it's that target that keeps me writing these others because I want to eventually get to it. And I love everything that I'm writing right now. It's the perfect read for me because I get to write it and end it the way I want it to be read. And when I'm writing it, I feel as if I'm reading someone else's work. I have enough in my quiver, put it that way.
What about your family?
My wife, Meredith, and Meredith is sitting next to me here laughing right now. We're having a blast. We're living in New York and Florida, renting here in the Jersey Shore for the summer, playing a lot of golf. I'm still doing a lot of surfing, trying to fit the writing in between all that. So it's been great.
I thank you so much for coming here today.
Mark, this has been such a pleasure, and it's been fun getting to know you through email prior to getting here. But yes, I'm sure it doesn't end here.
I definitely want to keep in touch. Now I guess I could bounce off ideas from you or whatever.
Yeah, feel free. You've got my email, and I'll be happy. It's been a great process. It's a lot easier than people think, but the first few steps are so monumental. Don't get discouraged.
Again, I thank you. And David, you want to give out your web address? Again?
Sure. David Nadas. That's like the Spanish word nothing, nada, with an S. So davidnadas.com. That will get you to my main website. And right now, up on Amazon is November Seed. It's in Kindle format. Again, you're going to need to first download the Kindle app if you do not have a Kindle. That's free, and you can get that from either Amazon, Google Play if you have an Android device, or the iTunes Store should have that as well. That's free. That's the first thing you need to do. Then go to Amazon and search for November Seed. Download that. Don't forget to review it. You'll see me on Wattpad. That's WATTPAD. You'll see me on Goodreads. And all those sites are connected, so no matter what you do, me and I'll answer any questions that you have. I hope you enjoy the read as much as I enjoyed writing it. There's a scene in there that gets me every time, and I'll tear up. Don't think it's going to hit you, especially after reading it like 50 to 100 times, but it does it every time for me. So enjoy the read.
This has been great.
Thank you, Mark.
Please come again. Love to have you on again sometime.
Yeah, and don't forget, listen to Mark's show every day at 3 to 6 because it is awesome. And it's been great for me writing because I'm like, okay, what's Mark playing right now? Let me jot that down and let me download it to my playlist. You'll see some of Mark's inspiration in the music that he's playing that's coming out in Silver Sides.
Thank you. I'm flattered. I wish you all the best. If you get a chance, read his fantastic work.
And go Stockton.
Go Stockton. There you have it, folks. Okay, we're going to take a break, and we'll come back with music.